Hello, BookTube, and welcome to the second episode of Authors Interviewed. And today I'm joined by Steve Stark, who is the author of the great horror novel, A Hot Dose of Hell, which you can buy on Amazon. I'll leave a link in the description to that. This also sort of apt that Steve should be the second author interview, as Hot Dose of Hell was the second self-published book I read on the channel. So um, thanks for coming on, Steve.
Very welcome. Pleasure to be here, mate.
Thank you. What sort of prompted you to write Hot Dose of Hell?
There's a lot of things going on in Hot Dose of Hell. So I wanted to write a horror novel anyway. That one in particular started out as a short story, and it just kept growing. That was how that one turned into a novel. I like the idea of these silly activists wandering into a situation that was completely above them and was totally lethal, and where under pressure we would see who they really were. And from that, the story just kept getting bigger and bigger. The other elements, like sort of shadowy group that are pulling the strings behind it all, Fred and Pinky, all that stuff sort of grew from there.
Yeah, I mean, and the characters are really a nice sort of different. There's a nice cast of them. Whether you got Fred and Pinky, as you mentioned, or Rhonda, or particularly the activists who are source of quite a lot of comedy in the story.
Yeah. I did have fun writing those guys.
Yeah. So, was there anybody particularly modelled any of the characters on, say, the activists or Fred and Pinky?
Yeah, so Fred and Pinky relate a lot to the kind of people I knew working on the doors when I was a bouncer. I met a lot of people who would fit the bill, Fred especially is a composite of a lot of the older guys I worked with when I was sort of first starting out. They were sort of teaching me the ropes, like tough old guys with they've made a lot of mistakes in their life and they've got a lot of wisdom from it, and Pinky is kind of part of the Pinky Fred interaction is based on a guy I worked security with who was Polish as well, and it was a lot of their banter was similar to the way me and him would banter, where he wouldn't know what I was talking about half the time. A lot of sort of cultural misunderstandings and things, and I'd have to explain stuff to him.
Yeah, and I've got to say, when I was reading it, I was imagining Fred as the late actor Brian Glover, and you actually mentioned that.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, that's a brilliant description. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, for those who don't know what I'm talking about, he played the school teacher in the film Kes, and he appeared in quite a number of other things.
Yeah.
Very bluff, bald-headed Yorkshireman, and Freddie. Really, that's a good image for Fred.
Yeah, definitely. A lot horror fans will know him from American Werewolf in London. He was the main guy in the pub, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Telling the joke about remember the Alamo.
Yeah. I take it that you just, with the activists, they were just effectively going off what was on social media, say.
Yeah, a lot of social media and certain things I'd observe every so often. Like the city I was living in at the time was very much a uni city. So if you were sat in a cafe, you might hear some obnoxious talk along those lines. I'd just be hearing, just daft things and just be sort of shaking my head. I think that winds up coming out then in the book. I just take exactly what they've said and I just put that in that character's mouth.
Yeah, some of the stuff you'd think was over the top, and then when you see people on social media or sometimes YouTube video, you're thinking, that you can't top that stuff. That stuff it's beyond parody.
No, it just parodies itself, doesn't it? It's so daft. Yeah.
With Scarmouth, is that based on any particular town, or is it sort of a combination of sort of run, in many cases, run down English seaside towns that there are quite a few of?
There are quite a few, aren't there? Yeah, it's very much a composite. So I grew up and spent a lot of time around the southwest, so a lot of towns all along that way I'm very familiar with. I was working security in those places, so I know exactly what they're like and exactly what their problems are. So I just pile all that into Skarmouth and then crank it up a notch or two. You know.
Yeah. It did actually did though. Obviously, you live in the southwest. It reminded me of It's Always a Blackpool.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that particularly the drug problem up there. I know is quite bad, and that's
Yeah.
one of the big things in the book. The fact that a lot of drug addicts and homeless people have effectively come down south and they're living in this abandoned hotel.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's exactly the thing. These sort of tourist places or former tourist places, full of abandoned hotels. You know,
Yeah,
around the corner from a place I grew up, actually, around the corner from there was a abandoned hotel there, and it was full of drug addicts and stuff. You always saw all kinds of things going on as you were sort of coming past there, and it was right around the corner from my house. So that was probably part of the inspiration for the Victoria.
yeah. With the the I'm trying to explain this without trying to spoil the book.
Yeah.
But the if we say the antagonists, so as I should
Yeah.
say, which are zombie-like, but they're not actually zombies. Technically, are they? They're more in the line of 28 Days Later.
Yeah, very much like that. Yeah, the idea of like just full of adrenaline and rage and high resistance to pain, high tolerance for injury. You know, they just keep going until you got to absolutely destroy them.
Yeah.
Very much like 28 Days Later.
Yeah. Was the Dawn of the Dead remake any influence on this?
Yeah, I love that film. I'm one of the minority who think it's better than the original. So a lot of people would. Sorry.
I wouldn't go that far, bro.
No, that happens every time I say that. Yeah. So yeah, that was big. I think I saw that one at the cinema like 3 times when that came out. It's fantastic. I loved it, and yeah, that probably 20 years later, that's coming out of me then when I'm writing this, you know.
Yeah, I remember when that came out. It was 2003, so I would have been 12, and I remember late night they put the first 10 minutes on Channel 4 for free.
Oh yeah.
And I remember just watching that thinking, this is great, but what the hell is this?
Yeah, it's fantastic film. I can imagine that's shocking to see it. Did you say 12?
Yeah, about 12. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a bit older than you then. I was old enough to buy a ticket. Or blag a ticket at least.
Yeah. One thing I would like to see is I've never seen a zombie film in the cinema.
Oh really?
In fact, people on my channel will know I'm a big fan of James Bond.
Yeah.
But I've only ever seen one James Bond film in the cinema because I was either too young or the tickets were too expensive.
Oh, got yeah. Yeah, cinema tickets are crazy now, aren't they? Like it used to be, you'd go to cinema for like a £5, or like when they used to do like Orange Wednesdays, the mobile phone thing. We'd go every Wednesday. We just go every week just for something to do. It's only a £5, you know. But yeah, a bit different now. It's like 20 odd quid to go to the cinema now, isn't it? It's crazy.
Yeah.
Hence why it's dying as well.
Yeah. And also the streaming services, everything is sort of combating it. Because you can pay 12 quid a month and get Netflix, and you've got a few things to watch every evening.
So. Exactly, yeah. Or 20 quid to watch something once. Yeah, it adds up, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. With what you said that it grew out of a short story. What was the initial sort of idea of the short story itself? And then what built onto it? If you can.
Yeah, it was similar to where it does go. It was the idea of the activists going to this impoverished town, looking to try and, you know, more so to get the clout, you know, to get the attention of like, look how nice we are, we're helping these homeless people. and they find this hotel that's supposedly full of homeless people. And originally it was going to be vampires, and it was going to
Right.
sort of turn the tables on them, basically, so they were going to be exploited by the vampires, basically. They were the victims then. But I thought it didn't quite work for whatever reason. And then the idea of it being the drug, I'm not quite sure where that came from, but I preferred the idea of the homeless almost being victims themselves at the same time. It's just a bad circumstance. Everyone's kind of in this together. The homeless people are victims, but I didn't want to sugarcoat anything about them either. So I wanted to have them interacting with the reality of homeless life before they then encounter the more horror side of it, with the actual drug that's taking them out.
Yeah. And you do get a nice sort of contrast among the homeless, where there are, particularly the main character, Rhonda's sister Roxy, who you can feel a great deal of sympathy for. And you've got other ones who, there's one particular one who, I can't remember his name now, the one who threatens one of the other homeless people to get the drug. If you know it, it's when they've dropped, when Roxy and have come back, and the one who's been outside using the bucket.
Oh yeah. And he gets yeah, exactly, because their life's hard, so they can be really mean as well. They've had to be mean to survive in that environment. And I can think of a lot of stories I knew about sort of homeless people. Again, in this city I used to live in, I worked daytime security for a while, and you get to know a lot of them because they're always in trouble, they're always causing problems here, there, and everywhere, and you get to know their stories, and I wanted to represent that side of it as well.
Yeah. With Rhonda, was that based on anybody, or was she created as sort to try and as a sort of added reason when you came up with the drug idea, or was it something that she was a part of it to begin with?
No, Rhonda was later. Rhonda was someone who would be identifiable. It's going to be very hard for anyone to identify with the Leg Up crew, I think. So to have their story running, I mean, that was where Fred and Pinky came from. I was like, I've got to give you some relief from these idiots. I've got to give you someone to root for. And you can't help but root for Rhonda. She's a nice girl. She's had a really hard life, and she just wants to try and help her sister. That's all she wants to try and do. And she's your way into the group. She's your point of view character, really. You might not. Some people are going to enjoy Fred and Pinky, but they might not identify with them. But I think most people will be sympathetic and identify with Rhonda.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Though I'm going to say, Fred and Pinky are my favourite characters, but I did identify and sympathise a lot more with Rhonda's situation.
Yeah.
And just even though they were my favourite, and I'm going to say their reaction to when they first come up against the effects of the drug are. I did smile. I'm not sure if that was intentional in that particular scene.
Yeah.
There's not to spoil it for anybody watching. There's a scene where involving a brothel, and a couple of the girls there have taken the drug, and they've been having an interesting time with one of the bodyguards of the brothel, shall I say?
Yeah. And Fred and Pinky wander into it. They get sent there because they've heard there's trouble at the brothel. They've got to go sort it out. So they go in thinking it's going to be one thing, and it's very different.
Yeah. One thing I'd like to bring up at this point, since it actually doesn't come into this scene, is the seagulls. If anybody's watching this who's been to a British seaside town, you know that seagulls are they're
evil.
They're a force of nature, and in Steve's book, they are a force of nature multiplied by 10, even before they get introduced to the drug, shall we say? Drugs.
Yeah.
we spoke about 28 Days Later and the 2000 and I think it's three Dawn of the Dead films. But was there any other films or books that also influenced Hard Dose of Hell?
I mean, quite inspired by like James Herbert. Read a lot of James
yeah.
Herbert and Sean Hudson. So, you know, something like James Herbert's Rats, you could
Yes.
see a bit of a correlation there, you know, between this like outbreak sort of situation getting more and more out of hand, and the kind of extreme gore and the kind of, you know, the down on the luck characters
Yeah.
as well. It's very much in there. Movie wise, it's had a couple of comparisons to Return of the Living Dead, which is a movie I love, and I can see that as well. I can totally see that, the idea of all these different characters get trapped in a building, and you know, those punks all start off with a lot of attitude, don't they? And they very quickly sort of crumble. You know, it's just these old guys who are actually taking charge of the situation and trying to solve it. So
that I do enjoy those films. Though I've got to say, I do prefer the Dead trilogy by Romero himself.
Yeah,
I think
that's the classier version.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, early on in the book, when Rhonda meets with the group of activists who are going to meet up to drive down to Skarmouth, there's a very interesting scene where around a war memorial.
Yeah.
And I think that readers, when I was reading it, sort of give you a good contrast between them and Rhonda. That they do something to the war memorial, which they think is a sort of punching up and some kind of great act of defiance, and she looks at it and thinks it's rightly just disgraceful.
Yeah, so I mean, there is a bit of history of that, of like activists staging a lot of events, you know, faking things to get attention on a certain issue, and it's quite often exposed. There's lots of reports of it. I'm not going to go into all the different ones, and I thought oftentimes it's something that they think, like you said, they think they're having a pop at the government by disgracing this war memorial, but what you're actually doing is you're having a go at the people who sacrificed their lives and the people who, you know, their relatives. That's who you're having a go at. So, yeah, I wanted to get that in there.
Yeah,
I think it sums up their mindset.
Yeah. And people like that don't seem to understand that those local war memorials will, as you say, have the names of people's relatives on there.
Yeah.
And especially if we're talking about something from the First World War, where in most places, I think almost every family lost somebody, so their name will be on that list. And now, just to talk more broadly about the writing, how do you sort of get into writing itself?
Well, I liked writing at school.
Yeah.
Didn't take it past that, and then sort of, it was late noughties. I was out of work for about a month or two.
Yeah.
And I just started writing for something to do. You know, there was a lot going on in my life and in a few of my friends' lives at the time, and there was a lot of stress and drama, and that sort of fed into this little short story that I wrote, and I wound up writing a few, and didn't really do anything with them. One of them I sent off to see if it would be accepted anywhere.
Yeah.
And it almost did get accepted. It went through like several rounds of, you know, where they were cutting. It went through several rounds and then got dropped at the last round. And I was like, that's not bad for a first story, I suppose, you know. But I didn't think anything more of it. And by the time that had come back, I was back in full-time work and not really thinking about it, you know.
Yeah.
And I just sort of found myself drawn to doing it again. You know, I had these stories that I wanted to tell, and I'd had even more crazy experiences that I kind of wanted to take and turn into something. Sort of 10 years or so later, and yeah, just started from there. Started with short stories first.
Would you actually recommend starting with short stories before, if to anybody who wants to get published, start with short stories before they go on to write, say, a novel or something like that?
Yeah, that was how it worked for me. That helped me sort of hone it really and look at a story. When you've got something smaller to look at, it's a lot easier to fix things and see how it's working. If you've got like a massive novel, it's a
Yeah,
lot harder, And that was how I started getting ready to write a novel. Was I treated, which is why some of my chapters are quite long. There'll be like 15 to 20 pages sometimes, and because I looked at each chapter almost as like a short story, where I wanted something to be happening in every chapter and some kind of action that keeps you involved and keeps the story moving along. So yeah, I'd say that for me was the key anyway.
As I said at the start of the interview, the book is self-published. As you've now got experience of publishing both a novel and, for those who don't know, Steve has recently published a collection of short stories called Violent Ends, which I will be reviewing on the channel probably in the next month or two. What advice would you give to anybody who's starting out in the self-publishing?
Get some people to read your stuff. Get some honest critiques. It really depends on what you're wanting to get from it. There's people who invest a lot of money, a lot of their own money, as well. But I think get some feedback from some people who you're not massively close with, so they'll be honest. Make sure it is something that you want to put out there, something that you feel is good.
Yeah.
And then all the other options are open to you, basically. However much you want to invest in it, however much, whether you just want to get it out there for getting it out there's sake, or if you want to, really, really push it. I personally have not invested hardly anything in it but my time. I put it out there. None of my friends, family, very few of them know about my writing. I just put it out there and see what happens, see who likes it, what kind of feedback I get. That was how I did it, because I knew it was a controversial novel. I knew there was no way any publisher was going to pick that up. Not a chance. So I just put it out there. I thought, all right, let's see what this does. See if anyone likes it. And then I had nothing but good feedback, apart from the odd, person who complains about it without having read it because they don't like the subject matter. Those kind of people. But generally, it's all been really positive and really helpful. I think you have to be your own biggest critic. Is the main thing. You have to really be quite hard on yourself when you're writing. You have to really sort of pull things in sometimes. Learn what you've got to chop away, and learn what you really want to amplify. I think is important. You can go on a ramble, you can go off on tangents sometimes because you think you've got something really good, and it's just flab. You got to chop it down. So yeah, be your own biggest critic. Invest however much in it as you think it's worth, whatever risk you're personally willing to take on it, and learn from your mistakes and expect to get them. Expect to get your critics.
Yeah. I could say I did. When I bought the book, I did go on Amazon and just look at the reviews, and I can say that, as you say, I think the overwhelming majority of them are very positive.
Yeah.
And also, as you say, the one or two that are negative are clearly either they didn't read it or they only got so far and decided to just throw the book up, put the book to the side, and just have a go at it. Which, as somebody who does reviews, I've never understood that. I think that if you're going to give a review book, even if you end up hating it, you should get to the end of it so that you can say that I did read it and this is my opinion. So going halfway through and then just saying I don't like it is unfair on both the book itself and the author, and also on the person who's reading or watching the review, because they're not getting the full context of it.
Yeah.
And when it comes to the modern publishing, and I think you saw this. It was a couple of weeks ago that that article that was going around saying, "Why don't men read novels anymore?"
Yeah,
And I said at the time, the title should actually be, "Why aren't men reading the books we want them to read anymore?"
exactly. Yeah, yeah. They're just trying to shove stuff down our throat and not give us things that we actually want.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
it's true.
and
Yeah, you were bang on the money there, Aaron. Definitely, mate.
and with that, with it, as you say, they're shoving stuff down our throat that we don't want to read, but the stuff that we do want to read, in many cases, you have to, unless you look into the self-published stuff with books like your own, you're having to go back to say still published in some cases before I was born, and I was born in '91, and so and your book very much seems to be a throwback to sort of the '70s and '80s stuff.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
And also, whenever you get a modern book, I'm not sure if you found this, that sometimes they're 400-500 pages long when they should frankly be only about 250. It's just, as you say, there's not that cutting out the the flab as
No,
you would.
yeah. I don't know if that's like a business model, if it's like related to how much they can charge for it or whatever that is, you know. But yeah, you don't see the little, the neat little pocket-sized paperbacks that you used to be able to
Yeah,
pick up, you know. There's nothing like that in any bookstores. To be honest, when I go to like the high street bookstores, it's rare that I buy anything from them anyway
yeah,
now. But when I do, it's like you said, it's never anything that's new, like brand new. It'll be a reissue of something, or it'll just be an much older story. There's nothing coming out now that isn't like sort of indie published, really, that doesn't catch my attention.
yeah. Yeah, I've noticed as well. Probably the only genre that I will buy that's new is usually history, where
Yeah,
that's still reasonably good. But with fiction, it's very, very rare that I find something published recently that really catches my eye.
yeah,
As you say, it's all older work. Um, we I, I know that, as I said, you had published Violent Ends. Could you just talk a bit about what those stories are, or not to spoil them, but in general
yeah.
terms?
It's always tough with short stories because you can easily spoil them.
Yeah.
So, Violent Ends, it's set in and around Skarmouth again.
Mm.
It's obviously slightly before what happens in Hot Dose of Hell, because I've got to cover
Yeah.
what happens after that another time. So yeah, 3 stories, variety of them, ranging different kinds of horror stories, from sort of creature features to like serial killer horror. Some of them are more darkly humorous. Some of them are just outright dark. The first story is about a serial killer on the prowl, and he's looking for his next victim. Although there might be more to her than we think. He might. He's slightly. Well, he's more than slightly insane. He's very insane. So we can't really trust what he's seeing and what his perception is on things. We'll stop there. Second story is about a church that's being renovated to be turned into a nightclub. And during the process of this renovation, the people doing it accidentally have disturbed the prison of a demon that was locked inside the church a long time ago. I won't say any more than that about that one. The third story is about a group of home invaders who are just on kind of this catastrophic rampage of house to house, and every house they go to, their situation just gets worse. They're just getting more and more entangled, more and more chaos around them, more and more carnage in their path. Basically, they were just looking for somewhere to stop and sort of figure out where they were going to go next, and they don't seem to be able to do that. Every house they kind of stop at, there's a problem. Again, I won't say any more about that one either. But,
Obviously, I'm looking forward to reading those.
yeah.
with that one about the church,
Yeah,
you ever seen the film The Keep, the Michael Mann film from the early
yeah,
80s?
yeah. That's good. I like that movie. Gets a bad rap, but I like that movie.
Because just the description of it did remind me of that.
Yeah, yeah. It's got that same kind of idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely disturbing something you shouldn't have disturbed, basically. You know, and the idea of ripping out this church to turn it into a nightclub. What are you unleashing by doing that? You
Yeah.
know.
It also sort of reminds me a bit of the ghost stories of M.R. James. You've always got in those usually an academic goes somewhere and sort of disturbs something, or in one case, a man owns a rose garden and he moves something and then he gets an unnatural experience.
All right. I've not read those. Who was that?
Oh, M.R. James.
Okay.
If you're old enough, so you might just remember them. There were the Ghost Story at Christmas series that the BBC used to run. If you
No,
remember that.
I didn't watch that. No.
Oh, I can highly recommend those.
Yeah.
They're really good adaptations of M.R. James's stories. He was writing from I think the first collection was published in the 1890s, and the last one was in the 1930s.
Okay.
They're really, I can highly recommend them. They're really good. The one adaptation I would recommend to watch to begin with would be "Oh Which Land I'll Come to." It's got Michael Hordern in. It was
All
done
right.
by Jonathan Miller, who was a part of Beyond the Fringe with Peter Cook and Dudley Moore, and
Yeah.
it's from '68. It's black and white, and it's really effective. It's a really good adaptation of the story as well.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I'll check that out.
For the sort of last 15 minutes, I'd like to just talk more about the sort of community of self-published authors on the sort of online, particularly Twitter.
Hmm.
How did you sort of discover that? Did they discover you, or did you discover them, as it were?
I think discovered them, and they're sort of a group that's sort of built up over time, and there's lots of little pockets. You'll find lots of different little groups going on. I was pretty much on my own for a long time. No one really wanted to go near me. It was little bit of a different attitude on Twitter at the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was quite a while later, and a couple of, I think it was a Beard of Darkness booktuber. I don't know if you follow him. He's great. Sort of found him and found Richard as well. Obviously, Richard Nichols, who you know. Richard Nichols was like the first person to properly interview me. And I've got, as you can see, I've got Lost Causes there. Love Lost Causes. And from there, I was like, oh, okay, there's more people I can get on with here. Where originally I was just putting it out there, like I say, trying to see if I could find anyone that would like my stuff. But yeah, there's a decent sort of community there now. It's a bit more broadened. I felt like it was very narrow before, or it certainly felt that way from my point of view, you know. So yeah, found Richard, found through Beard of Darkness, I found Sledge, Nick Horvath. Have you heard of him?
Yeah. I have, yeah. I'm intending to buy that book just
Excellent.
from everything everybody said about it.
There's that one there. Well worth a read. That's exactly the same kind of fiction that, like, you know, Richard writes in a way. You know, it's like men's adventure fiction. You know, it's perfect. Like Sledge is a badass kind of like character. He's a bit where he's got sort of a few different talents. You know, he's got great knowledge of physics, but he's also physically really impressive. He was a professional basketball player, and he'd done all these like cage fighting for his life in prison kind of thing. So he's got different sides to his personality, different talents that he can pull on, you know, when the time calls for it. So that's really cool. Another one here, J.L. Engel. Have you read Dangerous Man?
I've got that down to read in January.
Yeah. That's a good one. You'll enjoy that as well. Again, this one is about a vigilante who's taken down a ring of child traffickers.
Oh right.
And it's absolutely brutal, action packed, but it's an eye opener as well. You know, there's some tough stuff in there too.
Yeah.
Brilliant, and you can't help but just root for the hero.
Yeah.
Some people might call him an anti-hero because he's so brutal, but in my book, he's a hero. You know,
Yeah.
Ghost is an absolute hero. So yeah, that was another person I discovered.
Yeah.
Not too long after, and then after that, sorry, I'm going to keep pulling these, mate.
Go ahead.
But Dave Bizan in the Lair of Legends is a fantastic book as well. Have you seen this around?
I've seen it around. I think I actually followed Dave on Twitter as well.
Yeah.
So that one.
Brilliant. A history buff like you will love it.
Yeah.
Because Dave knows his history. He's done his research there. There's some amazing stuff in there, but the story is fantastic. It's such an adventure that goes on, you know. Yeah, I very much recommend that. Winterhawk gets pursued across the wilderness, basically being followed by these mad soldiers who are trying to steal some gold. And at the same time, there's Bigfoot, basically. There's these insane Bigfoot creatures. They're absolutely enormous and they're tearing everyone apart. And he's having to contend with both while he's just, all he wants to do is get home, you know. Brilliant story. So yeah, those guys, I've met all of them through Twitter, but I think it's only been over like the last year or so. And I'd been on Twitter for a couple of years before I found them.
Yeah.
And there's quite a few others I could mention, but I'd keep you here all day if I did.
Actually, I actually have a few. It would be back in August. I reviewed 2 collections of short stories and a novella by E.L. Montague, and it was that was actually you because he had done. I think he had replied to one of your tweets about about people who do reviews, and you mentioned my name, and then he emailed me, and then I started reviewing.
Oh, nice, yeah. I'm listening to the audio of To Catch a Witch at the moment, actually. Yeah.
I did a review of that. I really did enjoy that, especially the bit where
no spoilers.
Yeah, I'm going to. Okay, I won't mention it.
I started it only, I think it was yesterday. I'm about half an hour in.
Okay, then I won't say what I was going to say. But when you get to this bit, you'll know where I'm. Put it this way: if I say expelling, and I'll say nothing all that, but when you get to the bit, you'll immediately know what I meant.
Okay. I'll think of you when it happens.
Just because you mentioned Richard, the way I discovered you was through your interview with him on his channel.
Yeah.
And actually, back in the end of July, I decided I was going to do reading a self-published book a month, and it was and I decided to start it by going through all the people Richard's interviewed on his channel.
That's a good start. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So this month I'm actually going to be reviewing. I've partly started reading it, which is Sanity by Neo Victorian.
Oh, nice. I've not read that one actually.
Yeah, it's part of a trilogy. So over the next couple of months, I'm splitting up. So next month I will be reading. I know you know this author because you follow him on Twitter as well as I do. I'm just getting his book. John A. Douglas.
Yeah.
Black Man, which I'll be reviewing, which will be also the longest book I'll have read so far.
Oh yeah, that's chunky.
Yeah. And then I'll read the second book in Neo Victorian's trilogy, and then J.L. Engels book, and then I'll read Victorian. Then I'm going to just decide after that what I'm going to be reading next.
Excellent. So I got a question for you then.
Yeah.
And don't just say this just because you're talking to me and you're talking to a few of us. How do you think the quality of indie publishing compares to what is going out on the shelves, mainstream publishing at the moment?
It is, and I'm saying this not just because I'm interviewing you, but generally better. It reminds you a lot of the stuff I like to read, the older stuff. If I just go to Richard's book, I read a lot of spy fiction, and his book reminded me a lot of the stuff that you would read by Ian Fleming, Alistair MacLean, Ines Hammond, that sort of thing. Whereas in that interview, we spoke about the fact that because of John le Carré, who me and Richard are both fans of, British spy fiction and spy thrillers seem to, if they're not aspiring to be literary fiction, they don't seem to get published anymore. Whereas if you go back to the 60s and 70s and 80s, you had authors writing very pulpy sort of men's adventure stuff, particularly spy stuff, and even in a way that Len Deighton's novels, which aren't pulpy, but they're not literary fiction either. They're very much proper spy thrillers that you could read, but as I say, they're not aspiring to be literary fiction.
Yeah.
Whereas almost it seems across the board that authors are all trying to write a book that they think could get nominated for the Man Booker Prize, even when they're writing stuff that in genres that you know that the people at the Man Booker Prize would never even look at. That seems to ruin it. The quality goes down.
Do you think that's partly to do with the kind of people that are writing as well, like the kind of their own sort of social status seeking rather than just trying to entertain people and sell some books?
Yeah, I think
in the mainstream anyway.
Yeah, definitely. I think that with modern authors, it does seem to be they seem more to be interested in putting out something that they can say, I wrote it, as opposed to putting it out to say, make money, which might seem a bit odd. But if you look back in the past, particularly when you're talking about thriller writers, and particularly if you go back into the interwar period, they're putting out those short stories in those magazines. They're being paid, I think it was something like a penny a word or something. And so they're writing those stories for a particular length to make sure they get paid. And that thing about not seemingly forget that the seeming that people now, these particular authors seem to forget that one of the reasons you write these books is for people to read them and to buy them. It's not merely to stroke your own ego.
Yeah.
And I do think also, oddly enough, if you go back in the past, particularly before the 1990s, you had, let's say, in terms of, I'll go from thriller writing mainly because that's what I know the best. You had people like Ian Fleming, who are old Etonians, upper middle class. They would write stuff like that. But you'd also have somebody like Len Deighton, who was the son of a chauffeur, who would write. And there was a sort of mix of experiences. And also, I think there's also the element of the Second World War, that a lot of those post-war writers had served in the Second World War, and they were drawing on experiences of their wartime service, and also the fact that they had interacted with a hell of a lot of people in a way that modern writers really don't. When it comes to it's also just the fact that it's in sort of the creative arts. It seems to me that there's a very strong sort of class stratification in a way that there wasn't before. Quite a lot of those people are from very affluent, sort of middle class, some cases privately educated, well, quite a lot of cases privately educated people. The people who they work for and work with, they either know directly from growing up with them or know them from a friend of a friend. They've oddly enough, it seems like they've recreated the sort of old one of us society that existed before the Second World War, without any of the virtues of that.
Yeah, it does seem that way with a lot of just general like creative entertainment. It just seems to be all the mainstream stuff is dominated by a bunch of disconnected poshos. Bunch of people who they can't relate to regular people, and in fact all they want to do is kind of wag the finger in the face of regular people or turn their nose up at them a little bit. I think anyway. That's the feeling that I get when I see a lot of this stuff, like when I walk in a bookshop and look around the shelves and don't see anything that's there for me, or flicking around Netflix or something like that, looking for something to watch. It's all the same. It's not I'm not the intended audience, so I don't know many people who are.
Yeah, and a good example of this, in a particularly British context, is the BBC, where
Oh,
I mean, yeah, that's the exact thing. Now you think about the BBC, and it's just you don't, you can't even come to think, you can't even bear to think about it. But back in the 1950s, when the BBC was still very much the newsreaders wearing dinner jackets and bow ties to read the news, you could be a working class comedian or writer, and you could get hired to write stuff, particularly in comedy, and you could go far.
yeah,
So if you look at the comedians from the 50s and 60s, whether you're talking about the Goons, so Harry Seacombe, Peter Sellers, and Spike Milligan, who were jobbing comedians at the Windmill Theatre, where they were doing bits uh, in between the strippers coming on, and I think it was Dennis Mainwaring, or sorry, Dennis something or other. He was head of the comedy at the BBC. Would just go there, pick them up, and they came on. Same with Tony Hancock, and then with Hancock, you've got Galton and Simpson, who were they went far just for writing. He just picked them up in that way, where he found
yeah.
them. And but you just can't imagine that happening today in the BBC.
No, they don't seem to want that, do they?
No.
Rather than trying to look for something that could be popular, or that seems
Yeah,
like, you go into like a club and see everyone's laughing, enjoying this. Oh, this must be great. Let's put this on the TV.
yeah,
They're looking for the things that they like. They're not trying to speak to people like me and you. You
yeah,
know, that's how it seems to me anyway.
yeah, definitely. It's, hopefully
It's a
that
shame, but defund the BBC anyway. I cancelled my TV license quite a long time ago, and I think everyone else should. Personally, I think let them go. They're not doing anything for us anymore. They're offering nothing.
I was I wouldn't go that far, but I do think the BBC needs significant reform, shall we say?
I'd be happy with that. I'd be happy if it went back to how it was, but I
Yeah.
can't see that happening.
Well, I think at that point, unless you've got anything else to say, Steve, I think we'll wrap things up.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah.
So I hope everybody watching enjoyed this interview. I definitely did, and if from our discussion you're interested in Hot Dose of Hell, I can highly recommend it. I'll leave a link in the description to the Amazon link to Hot Dose of Hell. I'll also leave a link to Violent Ends, and also there'll be a link to Steve's Twitter and also to my review of Hot Dose of Hell if you want to hear about it in more detail. So with that, BookTube, I'll say goodbye, and I will see you hopefully next week. Bye, BookTube.
Cheers, Aaron.